There is a question that has been asked in almost identical words by a Zen monk in 13th century Japan, a Sufi poet in medieval Persia, a Christian mystic in 14th century Germany, and a Hindu sage in ancient India. Not similar questions, the same question. And all four gave, beneath the different languages and the different symbols, the same answer. This is a read-aloud summary of the Perennial Philosophy by Aldous Huxley. Published in 1945, this book is Huxley's attempt to map the one thing that every serious spiritual tradition on earth has agreed on, and to ask what it means for the rest of us, tonight, in the lives we are actually living. If you want a summary like this every week, subscribing takes one tap. Here is the ache this book addresses. You have read different things. You have heard different teachings from different traditions, in different languages, and somehow, underneath all of it, you sense that they are pointing at the same place, but you cannot quite see where that place is, or how to get there, or what it would change in you if you did. Huxley felt that, and he spent years answering it. What every tradition agrees on, the phrase perennial philosophy, was coined by the philosopher Leibniz, but Huxley is the one who turned it into a full investigation. The core idea is this: beneath the surface differences of every major religion, the rituals, the names, the stories, the rules, there is one shared metaphysical claim: that there is a divine reality underlying the world of things and people, that something in the human soul is either similar to that reality or, in its deepest nature, identical with it, and that the purpose of a human life is to come to know that ground directly, not just to believe in it, but to experience it without any gap between the knower and the known. Huxley found this claim not in one or two traditions, but in all of them. In the Upanishads, in Mahayana Buddhism, in Taoism, in Sufism, in the Christian mystics, Meister Eckhart, St. John of the Cross, the anonymous author of The Cloud of Unknowing, in Jewish Kabbalah. In the writings of figures so different in time and culture, that the only explanation for the similarity of their testimony is that they were all describing the same thing. The Oglala Indians spoke of the Sikhan, a divine element in each person, identical with the sacred essence of the world. Eckhart called it a spark in the soul. The Upanishads called it Atman. The Zen Buddhists pointed at it without naming it. The names are all different. The spark is the same. What you carry into sleep tonight is the possibility that the deepest part of you is not separate from whatever holds the universe together. That is not a comforting metaphor. That is the literal claim of every major mystical tradition that ever existed. Huxley wants you to take it seriously. The self that gets in the way. Here is where Huxley gets uncomfortable and honest. Knowing this divine ground is not automatic. It requires something most of us are not prepared to give: the loosening of the grip of the personal ego, the small, habitual self that thinks of itself as separate, self-sufficient, the center of its own story. Huxley draws on Buddhist philosophy here in a way that is precise, not vague. In Mahayana Buddhism, language itself is identified as one of the root causes of this entrapment. We take words for things. We treat the separate labels we give to experiences as evidence that the experiences themselves are separate. We say I, me, mine, hundreds of times a day, and each repetition deepens the groove of the illusion that this self is a sealed, standalone entity, unconnected to the fabric of everything else. Catholic monks in medieval Europe were discouraged from using the personal pronoun. Buddhist monks in the Far East were trained in similar ways, not as a performance, but as a practical strategy. If you change the habitual trigger, you change the habitual response. If you stop automatically reaching for I, the automatic selfishness that follows starts to loosen. This is not a call to destroy the self. It is a call to stop mistaking the self for the whole of what you are. Think of someone who has spent 40 years identifying completely with their job title, their reputation, their sense of being right. When that scaffolding collapses, through illness, failure, loss, they do not lose themselves. They find for the first time that there was something underneath the scaffolding all along. Huxley argues that what they find in that moment is what the mystics have been pointing at for thousands of years. The problem with knowing too many words about it. There is a passage in the Perennial Philosophy that has stayed with readers for decades, and it is one of the most honest things Huxley writes. He says, "Studying theology is not the same as knowing God. Giving assent to the correct doctrines is not salvation. It is," he says, "like poring over a map of Africa while believing you have been to Africa. Maps are useful. They point in the right direction. They tell you which roads to take. But no map has ever been the territory." And the great failure of organized religion, in Huxley's view, is the systematic confusion of the map for the ground, treating verbal formulas, correct doctrines, assent to the right propositions, as if these were the unitive experience itself. The Zen tradition understood this completely. A Zen master's job is not to give you better concepts. It is to break your attachment to concepts entirely until you stop looking for the truth in words and start recognizing it in the immediate, bare fact of existence. The koan, the unanswerable riddle, is not nonsense. It is a tool for exhausting the rational mind until it gives up and lets something deeper through. St. John of the Cross said the same thing in a different key. To rest in thoughts and concepts, however beautiful, is to settle for something less than God. The practical implication of this, for someone lying in the dark tonight with a mind full of ideas and beliefs and opinions, is simple and uncomfortable. All of it, all the ideas, all the beliefs, all the opinions, is still the map. The territory is something you have to stop talking about long enough to actually enter. What silence actually is. This leads Huxley into one of the most developed sections of the book, the question of silence and what it is actually for. The mystics across traditions are unanimous. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is a quality of interior attention, a stilling of the constant movement of commentary, judgment, analysis, and self-reference that runs through the average waking mind, like a second, louder voice running underneath everything else. William Law, the 18th century English mystic, wrote that rhetoric and fine language about spiritual things is emptier than ordinary chatter, and that a person who thinks they will grow in genuine goodness by hearing or speaking flaming words will have plenty of talk, but very little of their life in heaven. Lao Tzu said it in 6 words: "He who knows does not speak." Huxley is not telling you to stop reading. He is telling you that reading, including reading this, is preparatory. It points. What it points at cannot be delivered in words. The question is whether the pointing is accurate enough to be useful, and whether you are willing to go in the direction it indicates. The direction is inward and downward, beneath the noise of the speaking self. Not to kill the self, but to find what the self is resting on. 2 kinds of knowing, and why one doesn't satisfy. Huxley makes a distinction that runs through the whole book, and it is worth holding clearly. There is knowing about something, conceptual knowledge, the kind you get from books, lectures, descriptions. And there is knowing something directly, what he calls unitive knowledge, the kind you get from immediate experience that has no distance in it. He uses the word unitive technically. It means a knowing in which the knower and the known stop being separate, not metaphorically, not poetically. The mystics described states in which the boundary between self and world, self and God, self and the ground of all being, became temporarily permeable, and what was on the other side was recognized, not encountered as something foreign, but recognized as what had always been there. Aristotle knew about the unmoved mover. He could describe it philosophically, argue for it logically, explain its relationship to the cosmos. But Huxley says, Aristotle was content to know about it. The mystics wanted to become it, or rather, to discover that in some sense they already were it and had simply not noticed. This distinction has a daily application. You can know about kindness, about gratitude, about presence. You can understand them conceptually, read about them, talk about them. But at some point, understanding and talking have to give way to simply doing the thing, or simply being present without commentary. The knowledge that transforms is always the second kind. The body is not the enemy. One of Huxley's most important corrections of popular spiritual misunderstanding is this: the body and the world are not obstacles to liberation. They are the field in which liberation becomes possible. He draws a contrast between two approaches that recur across traditions. One approach seeks the divine exclusively by withdrawing inward, cutting off from the world, purifying the self through denial and separation. This is what Mahayana Buddhism called the Shravaka path, the hearer who achieves a kind of private nirvana, a state of inner peace and emptiness, but has not understood how to bring it back into contact with the world of other beings. The other approach, which Huxley clearly favors, is what Zen and Sri Aurobindo and certain strands of Christian mysticism point toward: the knowledge of the divine ground, not only in the heights of inner experience, but in and through the world itself. In the wood, under the stone, in the autumn leaves and the spring flowers, in the face of another person. This is a harder path. Huxley says, the inward withdrawal is difficult enough, but to hold unitive awareness while moving through ordinary life, to transform action rather than avoid it, to find the sacred not away from the mess but inside it, that requires something more sustained, more subtle, and more deeply rooted in the body than simple retreat. Your daily life is not the distraction from the spiritual work. Your daily life is where the spiritual work happens, or it does not happen at all. What you wake up with. We started with a question, one question asked in the same form across centuries and continents by people who had never met and could not have communicated with each other. Here is what Huxley says they all answered. There is something in you that is not the personality, not the ego, not the history, not the name. Something that was not born when you were born and does not die when you die. It is the same in you as it is in everything else. And the only reason you have not directly known it is that you have been looking at the map instead of walking into the territory. The testimony is unanimous. The path is different for everyone, but the direction is always the same: inward, past the noise of self, into what Huxley calls the ground of all being. Rumi put it this way: I died a mineral and became a plant. I died a plant and rose an animal. I died an animal and I was man. Why should I fear? When was I less by dying? You are not as small as you think you are. If something in this one stayed with you, drop it in the comments, and a like helps more than you know.